Welcome to the program. Of course, last week I had a debate with Dr. James White. Well, I think it went well, but we'll talk about it. You know, there's a lot to say about it, and there is a lot to review about it. We'll see how much we get to. But also, Dr. White has since had one of his dividing line programs, and I'm going to respond to some of the things that were said on there. You know, I don't think the debate went too well for Dr. White. It was cordial, but didn't go too well for him, I believe. I think he demonstrated that his position was inconsistent, Exegesis, and it was really a Romans 8 debate. That's at least what Dr. White wanted it to be. We'll talk about it.
Commentary, discussion, Bible teaching, and more with A.K. Richardson.
Please hear and learn.
Well, I do appreciate you joining the live program here on the channel. Or if you're listening after the fact on the podcast, I appreciate you listening. Of course, you could always join the program and be a part of the side chat on the YouTube channel live. Just look up A.K. Richardson in my name and subscribe and look for the notifications to know when we go live. All right, so I really appreciated the opportunity to have this debate. Jeremiah Nortier, Trey Fisher, and the church over there in Louisiana made that happen. I really appreciate it. I thank God for the opportunity that I can make the truth known, and I believe that's exactly what happened. Dr. White, Dr. James White, if you follow these circles at all, you know that Dr. White is one of, if not the most well-known, and I think one of the best defenders of Calvinism or Reformed theology that is out there right now. And, I don't think that he did very well. Now, first of all, it was a cordial debate. It was a cordial debate, and although it seems that Dr. White regrets that, but we'll talk about that in a moment. It was respectable. That was the number one comment from Calvinists more than anybody. It was how they appreciated the respectability of the debate and how we spoke to each other. And I always try to be nice, and I try to push if I think pushing needs to happen. And when I say push, in a debate, you can be aggressive to a certain extent without being a jerk. There are people that can't do that. They don't know how to do the balance. There's someone that I don't know much about. I think he's a Catholic. His name is Andrew Wilson. He's like an apologist of some sort out there, and boy, he's a jerk. From what I've seen, he's a jerk. Well, at least maybe that's strong. Okay, I just don't like the way he does it. I mean, in the little that I've seen, maybe I'm judging him by too small of a sample content, and I could be unfair there. But from what I've seen of this guy, I don't like him. And there's a lot of people like that who don't know how to be pushy and aggressive in debates and interactions without being jerks. And it's just not the way I like to do things. So I had this debate live and in person with Dr. White on Romans chapter 9. Now, Romans chapter 9, the reason it's significant, why did we just pick some random chapter? Why has James White done debates on this, and why did I choose a debate on this? I wanted to do an exegetical passage, and that's where you pick a passage as opposed to a topic. For example, I've debated the topic of losing salvation. I've debated the topic of libertarian free will itself, which is a Calvinistic issue. I've debated these kinds of topics. And that's fine, right? When you debate a passage, what you're doing is you're zooming in on one passage that one of you thinks demonstrates or proves a particular theology that is being debated. And so that's what we did. Now, Romans chapter 9 is known, and Dr. White believes it is a passage that proves certain tenets of Calvinism, namely unconditional election. Unconditional election is the idea that God unconditionally before creation decides which individuals are going to believe and which he will irresistibly grace to believe and so be saved. And so you're born in one category or the other. You're either going to be saved or you're not. Can't be changed. Everything you do is determined by God, in fact. Well, this is all part of Calvinism, and that's what we were debating. And so let me do something here. I'm going to refresh this. I'm not seeing any live chat, or maybe just people aren't chatting. That's okay. All right. Normally I see chat, but that's okay. Nobody's chatting. I just wanted to make sure my screen is okay. But so this is what the debate is about. Whose exegesis can be demonstrated from the passage? Now, I'm going to say that Dr. White has gone on his dividing line. And so yesterday I went on a program, a channel from... Oh, okay. So I saw a comment. Thank you. Sugio. Is that how you say that? Geist. I appreciate you guys in the side chat. I was just wondering, sometimes my screen don't show chat when they're there. Okay. So I went on, I was invited to come on Idol Killer channel, Warren McGrew's channel, with Leighton Flowers. I know Leighton more than Warren. In fact, I didn't know Warren very much at all. I've seen some things. I saw most of his debate with Matt Slick years ago. I had the idea that he was an open theist. He says he doesn't call himself that. He's something else, and I don't know enough to articulate all that about his beliefs. I don't know Warren. He was very cordial to me. Seems like a nice guy to me. I don't know the history with him and Dr. White, but evidently Dr. White despises him. I didn't know that Dr. White despised somebody more than Leighton Flowers, but it's Warren McGrew, evidently. I was invited on to talk about the debate. That's what I did. And I will treat Warren McGrew as, according to my own experiences, and he's been friendly. I don't know about his interactions with White, but merely being on his channel was enough to prompt Dr. White to say, I should have went harder. I should not have been so nice to AK. And that's okay. Sugoi. All right. That's your name in the side chat there. Okay, that's fine. But I'll tell you something, Dr. White. And he's probably not ever going to listen, so someone communicate to Dr. White. That's fine. Would not have bothered me if you went harder and were not as nice. But I'm here to tell you, I would have also pushed back harder. And with the answers that you gave, such like your answers with God having patience with his decree, it would not have went well for you. Because I can push on those sore spots. I try to be cordial. I tried to balance the persona also, along with this, of my interlocutor, with my opponent. You are being very respectable, and I do have respect for you for many things that you do. I would have had no problem of you pushing me, and I would have pushed just as hard, and I'm not intimidated in the least. Your answers were terrible. They were inconsistent and contradictory. Now, of course, everybody will decide for themselves, right? But merely the attitude changed just because I was on so much channel that he doesn't like. That's fine. He doesn't have to like me. I was going most of my life not ever thinking that I would do a debate with James White. Glad to have it. I'm glad he did it. Dr. White, I thank you for the debate, and I thank you for the respectability. Nothing's personal with me. You have something personal with Warren McGrew, and maybe he does as well. I don't know. The two don't like each other. And I'm not speaking for either one of them. Warren evidently doesn't care too much for White and their interactions. Not my business. I don't know nothing about it. Okay. So, but that's okay. JP, thanks for joining. Or JG, I mean. I appreciate you being a part of the live chat. Okay, well, we'll play some clips here also from the dividing line, which he was talking about. And guess what? I only heard a little bit. So we'll be hearing it in real time together. Why I say real time? Well, I'll be hearing it for the first time like you guys if you haven't heard it. First of all, the number one criticism I've received, and it's been friendly criticism, by the way, and it's been from my Calvinist friends, dozens. The number one thing they're saying, at least from what I can see, besides that they appreciated the debate being respectable, the number one thing they're saying is that I was off topic and that I should have dealt more with Romans 8. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not how this debate works. First of all, I was on topic more than Dr. White. I was absolutely on topic. The topic was Romans chapter 9, and I don't mind going to other things, but you can't focus on those things. Otherwise, you don't choose to have a debate on a particular passage and say, well, the chapter that comes before this passage we're debating, it's very relevant, very related, and very important. Well, but if you're going to debate it, then you say, well, let's debate that, or maybe let's debate both. Everybody's saying, AK, Romans 8 is very important because it comes just before Romans 9. I agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you guys. I assure you, I agree with you that Romans 8 is important. But the debate wasn't on Romans 8. You have to know how these things work. Okay. If you're debating a passage, in this case Romans 9, and there are other things that you think are relevant, even if it's the context surrounding it, you can mention it, you can bring it up, but you have to understand, if the two of you who are debating disagree about your interpretation of those passages, especially if it's a part of the same system which you are disagreeing on, when it comes to the passage you are debating, then you can't debate them. You just can't. So here's my question to Dr. White, if he's ever listening, and even on the dividing line to focus on Romans 8, and he wanted it to be a Romans 8 debate, which was not the topic. My question is, okay, Dr. White, you think the predestination and even the carnal versus spiritual mind of Romans 8 is very relevant to Romans 9. Okay, you and I disagree on those things. We have different interpretations. Do we debate those, or do we debate Romans 9? And if we debate both, okay, so then it's a Romans 8 and 9 debate. Unless you don't give as much treatment to Romans 8 that you do to Romans 9. And that's what you're supposed to do, because it's a Romans 9 debate. That's how it works. It doesn't matter if it's related, because if you disagree on it, then you're stuck. All you could do is focus on Romans 9. The question is, does Romans 9 teach Calvinism? And I demonstrated, no, it does not. Dr. White kept saying, well, he didn't even present something that I could interact with. Actually, I exegeted most of the chapter. I exegeted most of Romans 9, more than he did. And the reason he couldn't interact with it is because properly exegeted, as I demonstrated a proper exegesis to be, there's not much to disagree on with us and Calvinists. It's when they eisegete the text and add unconditional election, that God unconditionally chooses who will believe. When they add those things, that's where our disagreement arises. And because I properly exegeted, he didn't have anything to do. He didn't have much to rebut as far as See, it was mostly a rebuttal of me against him. It was mostly a rebuttal against Calvinism. Why? Because he's adding these things to the text that shouldn't be there. I added nothing to the text that shouldn't be there, so he had nowhere to go. Dr. White wanted to spend more of his time on other passages, and he excoriates other people if they do not stick to the debate topic. He has raked Leighton Flowers over the coal for years for not sticking to Romans 9, and he did just that. He wanted to spend more time on Romans 8. He wanted to spend time on presuppositions of total depravity. I get it. It's important. But he rakes Leighton Flowers over the coal for wanting to spend time on those when he wanted to do that as well. Dr. White even wanted to talk about baptism and once saved, always saved. And when I said, well, that's not really the topic, but we could talk about it, then he went to this, well, if you're uncomfortable talking about it, I'm not uncomfortable. I want to stick to the topic. I'm a stickler for debate rules. I'm a stickler for focusing on the proper point. Okay? It's a temptation to want to go off on once saved, always saved, the carnal mind in Romans 8 and predestination in Romans 8. It's a temptation because I've got views on those. I would love to debate Dr. White on those issues. Trust me. I would love to debate Dr. White on Romans 8. I'm willing to do it. He probably won't. It probably just me being on the podcast of someone that he despises, I guess, will probably turn that off. But let everybody know right now, I'm up for a debate. There isn't no reason he shouldn't debate me again, or at least have a conversation, because countless Calvinists themselves loved the interaction between Dr. White and I. And so did everybody else. I was friendly. I was respectful. I stayed on topic. And everybody had a great, even my opponents loved the debate. So there's every reason he could debate me again. If he might want to use the excuse, but he was on somebody's podcast that I despise. Well, I don't know why he despises Warren McGrew, but his interactions with Warren McGrew are not mine. I've never met Warren McGrew. I know about him, had some comments here and there through message or whatever. Warren McGrew was friendly to me. So I don't have the problem that he has. I'm sure that Warren McGrew and I will have lots of disagreements. That's the way that it works. Doesn't mean we can't talk about things we agree on. Doesn't mean we can't talk about things that we disagree on. That's the way this works. Okay, we got to step up. I mean, if you don't like Worm McGrew, okay, but that is not a reason to somehow try to use that as an excuse to diminish me. I would have went harder on him. Go for it. Let's have a debate on Romans 8 or predestination or total depravity. You go as hard as you want. It doesn't scare me. It doesn't intimidate me. Okay, we're going to get to some clips, you guys, of the debate here in just a second. I'm going to say this. What I tried to do was push Dr. White, but not push too hard because Dr. White will shut it down. And I think he shouldn't. I listened to a debate with him and Steve Gregg. And it was going fine for days. They did each day on the radio. But near the end, when Steve Gregg started, he said, I want to just ask Dr. White some questions. And he wanted him to answer briefly. Well, Dr. White didn't want that. And so Gregg started to push him, and White said, all right, we can't do this. Let's just go back to timed speeches. So White will do something like that. I didn't want to derail the flow of the debate. I wanted to keep going back and forth because he kind of gets upset over those things. And so I didn't want to push too hard. But let me tell you something. That answer, that absolutely absurd and contradictory answer on he does not have patience with his own decree, yet he does decree the things he's having patience with. I could have pushed that in so hard because it was obvious to anybody that it's contradictory and inconsistent. And that thing, I just could have gone and on with it. But I was trying to be reserved because Dr. White doesn't like to be pushed too hard, and I didn't want him to use that as an excuse, and then he would talk about that forever long. The truth of the matter is I stayed on topic. Dr. White did not. When I got him to get back on topic, like with the baptism and once saved, always saved question, he falsely represented me, unintentionally or not, as being uncomfortable with it. It wasn't uncomfortable with it. He was questioning me about justification through faith from Romans 8, and I kept saying, yeah, we're justified through faith, which is what I absolutely believe. And he kept saying, is that all? And then I'm thinking, okay, what's his point here? And then I saw a friend of mine in the audience smiling, and then it dawned on me what he was doing. I said, I know where you're going, Dr. White. And I guess some people interpreted that as, and now another guy I saw, I've got nothing personal against Paul Day. I think he's a Calvinist. I saw him in another conversation saying he was squirming. He was trying to avoid those issues. I wasn't trying to avoid the issues. It took me a second to realize where he was going. And then he even said, okay, everybody go back and listen to the debate. You know what I said. I said, I'm okay. Let's talk about them. If you want to talk about it, fine. But Dr. White did not proceed to question me on it. I was willing to talk about it, though I stated it was off topic. And I think Dr. White was afraid to keep pushing it because he knew he was off topic once I said the obvious. It had nothing to do with not being squeamish or wanting to avoid. I don't have a problem with my once saved, always saved views or my views on baptism. I believe they're consistent and we can have a debate on them. But the truth is, this represents, well, if you're uncomfortable, no, Dr. White, I wasn't uncomfortable. I said right there, it's off topic, but we could talk about it. And then the cheapest point of the debate, and it did not land well with the audience, even Calvinists, where he said, I don't know what you were talking about, and I don't think you do either. And everybody's reaction, I knew what you were talking about. No, I talk fast, granted, but everybody knew what I was talking about. So that was a cheap line that did not land even in the room. And well, I think it was because he was struggling. So now, Sugio says, so AK is making up theology as far as libertarian free will and Adam is concerned, in my view. Well, of course, everybody heard, by the way, that was a great victory in the debate. Dr. White conceded that not only did Adam have libertarian free will before the fall, but you can have libertarian free will and God is still sovereign, which is interesting because often it's irreconcilable in White's mind. When people talk about that God chooses to give people libertarian free will, I've heard him say, so the first decision God made in his sovereignty was not to be sovereign, but all of a sudden, for Dr. White, libertarian free will is not opposed to God's sovereignty. And that is very inconsistent. But I do want to get to some clips. I know people want to see those. So if you're a Calvinist, let me know some questions. And yeah, I would join the conversation with Apologetic Dog, but I don't think they're going to have me on. They're not. Even if I go, they're not going to put me on. So we're going to take some clips. Okay, a couple questions. AK, does Calvinism actually teach saved by faith or by eternal election? I thought if no election, no faith, and no salvation. Well, what they teach is that God unconditionally, from eternity, chooses who will believe and be saved. So there is a condition for salvation, faith, but he unconditionally chooses who will necessarily meet it. And so that's what it is. So you could say, and Calvinists will often say that Calvinism teaches salvation is conditional but not election, because salvation is conditioned on faith. Well, I make that distinction as well because it's true, but it ultimately doesn't mean anything because he unconditionally chooses who will meet the condition, and irresistibly so. So I appreciate the comments. Any questions about Calvinism? Because I said I would take questions on the debate. If you got a question, just put at AK. Because there's a lot of chat. I don't know what's really addressed to me or not. Yeah, well, so Sugio, who's a Calvinist, I guess, says when White gave into the idea that Adam had libertarian free will, that is not the Reformed tulip position. A lot of Calvinists have problems with that. Determinism is a philosophical category, not Calvinism. Clear? It's philosophical in nature, but it is something Calvinists believe, that he determines all things. Most of what we say is philosophical. To say God is Trinitarian involves a lot of philosophy. Philosophical concepts are behind everything we say. To differentiate philosophy from Calvinism itself, philosophy. So it is a theology that has philosophy as a part of it. When you say that God unchangeably determines all things, you just stepped into philosophy. It is theology at the same time. But anyway, so I do got some clips here. Actually, I just got the debate. So we'll look at a few things. I also got clips of the dividing line where James White was talking about the debate. I only heard I heard about a minute. So when we get to it, we'll be hearing it for the first time together, at least most of it. Yeah. Okay, so I got the debate pulled up here. I'm going to go into cross, because that's the most important part. And by the way, where the debate happens is cross-examination. That's where it happened here and in the Q&A. One of the best questions was from some girl that stepped up, and it was a very succinct question, and I thought that's a great question. Boy, I wish I had more than 30 seconds to respond to it, but and so let's go to the cross. And by the way, Dr. White kept saying this is not a debate on Calvinism. He knows what it's a debate on. The conclusions from his exegesis is called Calvinism. He calls himself a Calvinist. They are distinct to Calvinism, so that's what it was about. All right. Now, so I'm going to set up the first question. One of the things I had said in my rebuttal was that Dr. White's exegesis, or Calvinism's exegesis of the passage, involves irrational logic, self-defeating logic, and it does. It absolutely does. And the one example I gave a couple. I could have gave more, but one was where the Romans 9 talks about God having patience with the vessels of wrath. And Dr. White emphasized God's patience with vessels of wrath. And I said, well, according to your own system and how you exegete Romans 9, God determines everything unconditionally and unchangeably. Everything happens exactly as he determines it to happen. Every thought, motive, and deed. Let that sink in for everybody. Every thought, motive, and deed is fixed by God's unchangeable decree, and no human power can make anything happen differently than when God wants. And And so I said, so what is God having patience with except for the very things he himself decreed to happen? He's having patience with his own decree. That's self-defeating. That's not good logic. And so I pressed him on that. And so during one of his rebuttals, he said, is God having patience with his decree? No. And then I questioned him on that because that's obviously inconsistent with his view. So here we go. Let me know if the sound is okay.
His power and wrath, demonstrating his...
All right, thank you so much, Dr. White. We are going to begin our 10 minutes, multiple rounds of cross-examination. And so we will begin with, AK, you get 10 minutes to control your time of cross-examining Dr. White. Now, this is your time to control, so you can frame a question how you want, and if you don't like how it's being answered, you are welcome to interrupt, and it's not rude. So you
okay, sound good? Does it sound good?
That you would like. And so when you begin speaking, we will start your 10 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm going to start with kind of one of the last few things you said. Well, I don't know how it was last or not, but you said in response to my questions, Dr. White, about God having patience with his own decree, you said, no, God is not having patience with his own decree. So my question is, the evil deeds that either Pharaoh or Israel is doing, did he not decree those things?
Yes, he did.
So then, how is he not having patience with his own decree?
Because his decree includes providence in his actions and time. So Jesus entered into time. He ministered for 33 years. God demonstrated patience toward the people who abused his son during his ministry. So there's a vast difference between eternity and in time. God's decree determines the shape of that time, but it doesn't change the reality that God has the intention of demonstrating his power and wrath, demonstrating...
It's not about the intention. You hear what he's doing? He's talking about God's intention. Yeah, that's irrelevant. We all believe God has intentions by what he does. Okay, but he has intentions behind it, but the question's still the same, right? Does he decree them? Well, but he has intentions, he has a purpose behind this. I know that, but does he decree everything that happens? These things that he's having patience with, does he decree them in Calvinism's view? Saying that God had a purpose doesn't answer the question, right? It's irrelevant. Yeah, he has a purpose, but also decrees them. And by the way, saying that he has a purpose behind him is only an affirmation that he decrees them. Okay, Sugio says, stop confusing philosophical determinism with the Calvinistic view of God's decree. I'm not. Do you not believe that God unchangeably decrees every thought, motive, and deed? And do you believe there's any human power to change any of it, to do anything different? This is logic. It is basic logic. Now, you can't escape logic. Let's not act as if we could throw simple, basic logic out the window and say, well, it has to be a theology. You can't do theology without logic. That's the way that it works. Okay, Trinity. That's why people want to say that it's illogical, and I defend the rationality of it. So let's be consistent. To say that God decrees and determines every thought, motive, and deed unchangeably, and then say he's having patience with men's evil acts is inconsistent, because that's very basic logic. Humans have free will and are responsible. Well, are you defining it according to compatibilistic free will, which is not free? Because if you are, that's like saying, well, man, you're free to buy this car in any color you want as long as it's black. You're not free to do anything other than what God determined for you to want to do. Okay, is the sound change? Okay, some of you were saying it didn't sound good. I did do something different. I don't know if it affected anything, but let's keep going. So basically, he's going into God has a purpose. Irrelevant. Did he decree the things that he's having patience with?
Mercy, and he does that in time. So I think you have a fundamental problem in confusing something that is eternal to God that we don't know, though his Bible, this word reveals it, and how that plays out in time itself.
How it plays out is not the point, but the fact that it does play out. He's saying, well, we don't know exactly how it plays out in time. Doesn't matter. It does play out. God has unchangeably determined every thought, motive, and deed in Calvinism. So everything that happens, every choice that you make because he has moved creation through means, secondary means, and all that for you to have it, and you have no human power to do anything differently, nor even to desire to do anything differently. So it's very clear. All evil deeds are unavoidable. Men must do them because God has decreed it so. So he decreed them. How they play out, no, we could talk about that, but it's irrelevant. They do play out as of necessity, and he decreed them.
Something Christians have always struggled with, time and eternity, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I'd agree with most of that, but it seems odd to me, though. You did say just now that, yes, those things, their evil deeds, are his decree. Yes, he's in eternity. But so if those things are his decree, as you affirmed, and those are the things that does the text not say that he is having patience with those things?
Well, again, give you an example. Acts chapter 4 says that God's purpose and decree determined beforehand that Jesus would be turned over to Herod, Pontius Pilate, the Romans, and the Jews. And
well, I believe that. You see what he's doing? He's just saying, well, the Bible says it. Well, it doesn't say in that passage that God determines all their motives and deeds. It says that he predestined the crucifixion. And the assumption by Calvinists is so he determined man's will in order to accomplish it. I think he purposed to use evil men to accomplish his great purpose, which is the crucifixion. See, he could use evil men without determining their evil. He uses them, which is much better. So the idea that he just going to the Bible and saying, well, the Bible says it. Well, we disagree on whether the Bible actually says what he says about it. But so to answer the question, yes, and in your understanding of things, he determines every single thought, motive, and deed. Just so he does decree. It's that simple. Now, I could have easily hammered him on this, try to take it lightly.
so obviously God had been patient in allowing Herod to do all the crazy things that Herod did so that Herod could fulfill his part of the purpose. Same thing with Pilate, very different than Herod, the Jewish leadership, the Roman soldiers. God had been patient with all of them. Why? So that God could demonstrate.
But he's not answering the question, right? He's saying, well, God has been patient. Yeah, we know. That's what I'm asking you about, Why? And if I wanted to press him, if he was able to take the kind of thing without shutting the debate down, I would say, I know God's patient. I'm asking about God's patience. The question is he patient with his own decree? Telling me that God is patient doesn't answer the question as, is he patient with his decree? We both know he's patient.
His wrath and to make his power known and to then demonstrate his mercy. So,
well, you're speaking about God's purpose in having patience, but still, yeah, the question is, you affirm that the things they're doing are the things that he decreed. So my question is, are those the things that he's having patience with according to the text?
Again, God has decreed to interact with his people in such a fashion.
Not how he interacts, not how he decrees it or how it plays out. It's a simple yes or no. Now, you can go on to explain it. I don't usually try to do that to people. But at least give me a yes. You know the answer is yes. We all know the answer is yes.
That he demonstrates patience and long-suffering with, for example, Israel. And we can take much.
So now he's saying God has patience again. He's going back to the same thing. Well, the Bible says God has patience. Yes, Dr. White. We've already conceded. We're past that. Been there, done that, got the T-shirt. What we're saying is, does he have patience with his own decree?
The many instances where he showed patience with Israel. Now, my counter to you was, don't you think, do you believe that God couldn't do that? That he couldn't decree to have to show patience and therefore give us examples of how we should be patient, etc.?
Of course, I wasn't answering questions at the moment. But I have never made the argument that God can't do things. If the purpose of God was to act as if he's being patient in order to demonstrate patience, well, he may be giving us an example, but he's not actually being patient. He's acting patient for an example. That's what it would be. God would be pretending to be patient, or he would be acting as if he is patient in order for us to learn something. He might be able to do that, but he wouldn't actually be patient. You understand the difference? God might act patient to teach us how to be patient, but he's not actually being patient. Well, the Bible just says he was being patient, and actually means something in my view.
Etc. So to me, it just seems like you're conflating God's eternal purposes and his actions in time.
They might be his actions in time, and they might be eternal purposes, whatever it may be, but does he answer the question? He keeps on dodging it, right? Walsh, appreciate you being here. Sandy, Caleb, Kelsey. Give this debate review a look sometime. I did. It did a pretty good job. I'm not sure which one that is. 16:11, Psalm 19, I appreciate all you guys. CJ Marshall. So, again, dodge.
Well, see, here's the problem, and this isn't a gotcha thing, but it just seems like, I agree that God has a purpose in the things that he decrees, but when you say in your rebuttal that God is not having patience with his decree, but then you say, but those things are what he decreed, and I get that he wants to demonstrate his wrath. Yes, that's the purpose, but I don't know how you escape the conclusion that he is having patience with his decree when you affirm that those are the things that he decreed.
Well, Romans 9:22. It's if we can get back into the text this way, and what if God, wanting to demonstrate?
We never left the text. The patience is something in the text. Okay, I'm not the one that left the text. Dr. White continually left the text. Theology Matters, thanks for being there. By the way, that reminds me, there was some confusion, like the wrong link. I posted the link that they gave me, or whatever it was, and somehow it wasn't working in the beginning. Actually, it was some other link. I don't know what happened there. But now what was I saying? Oh, I didn't leave the text. Yeah, everybody noticed it? I didn't leave the text. Patience is in the text. The word patience is in the text. So that's meaningless for him to say, if we can get back to the text. We haven't left the text. I'm questioning you about something that occurs in the text. And I realize why this is important. Because if the logic behind your exegesis is irrational or self-defeating, you got the wrong exegesis. Because you can't affirm things to be true if it's illogical. This is self-defeating. There's several other things that would be self-defeating in the text that just didn't have time to get to them. So I didn't leave the text. The one that was wanting to continually get out of the text was Dr. White. When Leighton Flowers does it, it's bad. When Dr. White does it, it's related,
Demonstrate his wrath and make his power known. Those are temporal activities. They have to take place in time.
Of course they do.
Endured with much patience. There's the patience. And endurance has to be during time. And you could argue, well, God isn't in time, so he doesn't have to endure. No, this is God's providence in action. Endured with much patience, vessels of wrath. So what's he enduring? What's the patience toward? Vessels of wrath. Because his wrath could have broken out against them. God has the right to take any sinner out in any way he wants to at any point in time. We don't generally believe that. We don't live that way, but it's true. So the patience is toward vessels of wrath having been prepared for destruction. And then he's patient toward us, vessels of mercy, which he prepared beforehand for glory, so that he can make known the riches of his glory. So it's right there in the text. I'm just trying to repeat it.
I'm not going to keep pushing this too much. I guess just one last time here. But you keep asserting that he has patience. I agree with that. But still, the things you do believe, is it not true that the things that he's having patience with is the things that he decreed?
The things he's having patience with are the vessels of wrath, which having been prepared for destruction. The text is right in front of us.
Right. So, did he decree the vessels of wrath?
Since he's the one who prepared
He's
them
struggling,
for destruction,
man.
yes.
So then he would be having patience with his own decree.
Again, if you can't see the distinction between what God decrees to take place in time.
No, Dr. White, it's not about distinctions. It's about you being inconsistent. So now let's go to something. Now, boy, I wish I had the time marker. I didn't put time markers where he conceded that Adam had libertarian free will.
Right?
He was going to do what when you say had, nothing necessitated.
I wish I knew which
man
point
the
that is.
Responsibility.
Off there, I'm just simply saying if I believe Romans 8:30 is very much part of the context of Romans 9, so I'm not trying to get out of Romans 9, and I want to get into Romans 9 and the calling, but those whom he called, he also justified. Those whom he justified, false soteriological language.
I'm trying to get to the second cross-exam.
So then would you not have to logically include or conclude that that doesn't mean that he is causing people to believe or that he is determining for people to believe if they have libertarian free will?
Well, obviously, I would have to say no, because of the fact that he is the one who makes vessels of mercy out of the same lump. And as I pointed out before in regards to the term calling, which we'll get back to in 90 seconds, the reality is difference, but my point is the application. And I think one of the problems we have here is I don't have a specific laid out perspective from your side to hold the same standard of examination.
I know I kind of jumped around there, but on this remark here, he had my exegesis. At 20 minutes of an exegesis. That's what you need for a debate. He relies on the presuppositions of total depravity. If you have to rely on one part of your system to establish other parts of your system in a particular passage, and that particular passage does not prove your system. That's called begging the question. Begging the question is when you assume the very thing you need to prove. Now you say, well, AK, don't you bring... This is where people are missing it. Calvinists are saying, well, AK, you bring presuppositions. You're missing the point. I understand everybody brings presuppositions to any passage. I am not relying on a presupposition that he disagrees with to establish another part of my theology that he disagrees with. Like, we come to the text agreeing that Jesus is divine, there's a Trinity, we believe in there's an atonement, we're not universalists, so there are many things we bring as presuppositions, that God's word is inspired, that Paul wrote Romans. So we don't even have to discuss those, right? But if one of the presuppositions that we're relying on for our exegesis to interpret the text is one that is also debated, that's begging the question. That's why you can't debate Romans 8 on predestination, because then it has to be a Romans 8 debate, which is what he wanted it to be. And then he's accusing me of not... That was amazing. Dr. White was saying I was leaving the text. Did he participate in the same debate? I know exactly what I did. I debated verses 1 through... I exegeted verses 1 through 24 in the opening speech. I nearly covered every one of those verses. And the verses that come after are not really the debated portions. The only outside references I went to was given a background on the first 8 chapters of Romans. I didn't focus on any one. And I went to Old Testament passages that are cited in Romans 9. That's exactly my job. Did I give some preemptive rebuttals? Yes, Dr. White said there would be, as a matter of fact, before that time came, from both sides. During my first rebuttal, I responded to things he had said. That was my job. And in my second rebuttal, I responded to things he had said. That was my job. In the cross-examination, I asked about things related to Romans 9, like patience, like free will as it relates to comments he's made on God's sovereignty from Romans 9. I stuck to the text, and I can prove it any way you would like. All you Calvinists saying, I didn't stick to the text, it was exactly the opposite. Okay, Theology Matters. I really appreciate that. Okay, 141. Well, okay, I was almost there. So I appreciate that. I didn't want to go searching around for it. So, this is a huge victory. This is massive. And I had it there. I thought, there it is. I pushed him a little bit on it, and I decided, all right, since that's in the bag, let me get some others, and I moved on. This is huge.
Quote, free will choices that could invalidate prophetic scripture.
Well, so if you define overthrow that way, the non-Calvinist, is it not the case, defines it the same way in the sense that God knows how to keep people from doing what they want. Yeah, that, you know, if somebody wants to kill Jesus, I mean, that's not a problem for God. And that's not man not having a will.
Actually, you know what? Theology Matters. This is not the same video. It might not be the same time. I edited out the break and some of the beginning. So my time might be different than yours, but it's somewhere around here.
It's not a problem because I don't believe that the man's free will is an idol to God, where he is somehow concerned about it. When he says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this purpose. He doesn't sound to me like most of the libertarian free will guys that I talk to online. But I would think they would be objecting to that.
Don't you see? But my point is, do you not see the distinction between man is not being able to carry out his?
I said, do you not see the distinction? Actually, he didn't make the distinction. There's a difference. He's conflating man's ability to carry out his will. People often do this, even in non-theological discussions. People conflate one's abilities with one's will. You know, you could will to fly, but not have the ability to do it. But that's not. People will say, well, you don't have free will to fly. Yeah, you have free will to fly. You don't have the ability to fly. I could will to fly all day long. As a matter of fact, when I was a kid, there was one time I was young, I kept jumping off of this log, and I was praying to God, and I did it repeatedly just to let me fly. And I was really serious. I said, God, just this one time, please let me fly. And I jumped. I wasn't flapping my arms, but I was just trying to take off. I never did take off. I had the will freely to fly. But God did not so bless me in answering my prayer in the positive there. But
and overcome God. There's a difference between that, which is what you're talking about. You know, he doesn't allow men to kill Jesus if he doesn't want it. He doesn't allow wars to happen that he doesn't want. There's a difference between that and man not having libertarian free will.
Well, there is a difference, but my point is the application. And I think one of the problems we have here is I don't have a specific laid out perspective from your side to hold the same. Personally, he's a wonderful guy.
But I do believe the issues we're talking about, well,
it's no longer there. So you've got the general, you've got all this.
And it's that God is the one giving man the responsibility.
Well, there's a lot of different things that I think are being conflated. I don't know, honestly, how you on the one hand say it's a controlling. What I'm saying is, if you say.
Now, you know, I think it's good that we are questioning and asking about, you know, the will and stuff like that, because it is absolutely crucial to Romans 9, because.
Yeah, you know, so anyway, I was just wanting to skip around a little and hear some of these things. Everybody can watch it and see where he conceded what some Calvinists don't like, which is that he conceded Adam had libertarian free will. He was created that way, and God was still sovereign while libertarian free will existed. But yet, if you hear what Dr. White constantly says, you know, God creating man with libertarian free will, Dr. White has categorized as God choosing not to be sovereign. He often discusses it as if God has to bow the knee to man's will. Well, you just conceded that libertarian free will doesn't mean God is not sovereign, and it obviously doesn't, because we're talking about how God has chosen to design his creatures. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have to go to it. Let's see.
Choice if it's the result of God's decree. Have you ever debated an open theist?
I've talked to them. I've never debated them, though.
Try it sometime and your answers will change because it's a.
I mean, no. I mean, what we believe is, again, I just respond to what you said there. How did you say it there? The last few things that you were saying.
Well, I asked about Judas. Could
before Judas?
I don't remember.
Okay. Boy, I had
We
a
can roll the
great
tape back if
point.
we need to, I suppose. But
I had a great point, but that's all right.
don't worry, it starts happening more and more the older you get. Trust me.
Well, I'm just 40, so I guess I'm a little. I'm afraid it's happening that early.
Okay, let's get into the text in the last 2 minutes here. Would you admit?
Well, I thought that was the.
Well, I believe he had the same with his own decree.
If
Here's my question. Do you believe God has the freedom, since he is
Here it
the one
is.
who wills, since it is up to him, does he have the freedom to give man the responsibility to believe?
man has the responsibility to believe.
Okay, do you believe that if God purposes to design man with libertarian free will, as we call it, and then give him the responsibility to believe, can he do that if he wants?
Yeah, it didn't last long. That was called Adam.
Okay, so then if so,
That's a huge concession, because 80% of my arguments and debates with Calvinists when it comes to free will, when we're talking about those things, is they say God is sovereign, God is sovereign. No, we don't have libertarian free will because God is sovereign. It ain't man that is sovereign. And what do we non-Calvinists, if you listen, there's hundreds of thousands of debates between Calvinists and non-Calvinists, and we're talking about this particular aspect, the non-Calvinists, and saying, you're assuming sovereignty to mean that God determines everything. That we believe God is sovereign. But it just conceded that man has libertarian free will and God is still sovereign. At least Adam did. And that is not true. It's inconsistent in his theology, because if God unchangeably determined every single thing, then whatever he wills, or whatever he determined for Adam to choose, he did not have the freedom to choose. You know, by the way, Calvinists often say, yeah, man's free. He's free to choose his sin. That's not true in Calvinism. Man is not free to choose his sin. It's a little off here, but no, you must. There is a necessity. It is unchangeable. Not only must you choose your sin, you're not even free to choose which particular sin you commit between a range of sins. I mean, you could kill somebody by murder, by shooting, or by stabbing, or by strangulation. God has already decreed which one of the choices you'll make, which type of sin. You're not even free to choose between sins. You know, I could sin this way or that way. No, you will sin the way God determined. That's not freedom. Anyway.
he did create Adam with libertarian free will, so then you would concede.
But even then, that libertarian free will existed under the decree of God, because it was not God's purpose.
Of course.
That Christ was not going to come.
Welcome to non-Calvinism.
Necessary stuff like that. But Adam is completely different than we are. Once the fall takes place, we're in Romans 5.
But you did affirm that he had libertarian free will.
Yes, as
Okay.
a creature.
Right.
In other words,
Of course.
he did not have
We're
a
all
fallen
creatures.
nature.
Right. So when God created Adam, here's a man who had libertarian free will. Was God still sovereign when you had a man who had libertarian free will?
God was still sovereign because he then accomplished his purpose even in Adam. Yeah.
So
God accomplishing his purpose and his sovereignty through libertarianly free choices. Welcome to non-Calvinism. Come on over, James. Welcome. We welcome you with open arms. We love you. Welcome to it. All right. I got another clip here from the dividing line, which I have not seen all of this. But before I do, I just remind you guys that this podcast audio will be available on podcast sites after it goes live. Spotify, all the others that you could find for podcasting. So go out there, share the word, spread the word about the podcast being out there, not just on YouTube, but also on YouTube. Subscribe, like, share the YouTube channel. That helps if you appreciate the content. I won't blame you if you don't and don't want to share it, of course. Although I would love it if you'd still share it, even if you don't like it. That'd be nice. But no, I appreciate the side chat, the live interaction. But again, let everybody know, for the podcast sake, it's available on audio. We do it live on YouTube, and then it becomes available on podcast audio afterwards. So I always want to say that, and I appreciate it. So, so he had a dividing line program. I think it happened yesterday. I saw it earlier this morning, but I only watched a minute. And we'll see what he has to say. There, we got it right here.
Jeremiah moderated the debate with A.K. Richardson, and I was going to show this.
Now, I know it's fast. I sped it up. It's just the way it is. So, I'll go back.
Debate review, because Jeremiah moderated the debate with A.K. Richardson, and I was going to show this. I wonder if I think I can. Yeah.
He's just talking about pulling something up on the screen. There we go.
But check this out. So here is a program with Leighton Flowers, A.K. Richardson, and Warren McGrew. Can God survive trillions of free will decisions? Romans 9 debate review.
Yeah, and it's a good question, too, because Dr. White kept emphasizing how many billions of free will choices go in and how is God going to accomplish his purposes. See, this was another weakness. As if God finds that difficult. God created the universe from nothing. I think he can handle bajillions of free will choices and still accomplish his purpose. If he can handle one, see, that's the thing. He concedes that Adam had libertarian free will, so there's 1, 2, 3, a few choices that are free. But eventually you keep adding these up, and he's not quite sure how God will pull it off. I don't think it's a difficult task.
Obviously, I was far too nice to Mr. Richardson, and I really did try to. He was very sensitive about his Church of Christ affiliation being made a big part of anything. And
was I? Now, first of all, I don't know what in the world he's talking about. I was very sensitive. That is I won't call it slander. I mean, it's not that derogatory about my character or anything, but it's just absolutely false. Who says that I was sensitive? I don't even know what in the world he's talking about. The only time that issues with my Church of Christ background came up is when he started questioning me on baptism. And it wasn't the topic. And I said in the debate, you want to talk about it? Let's do it. So what in the world? He's trying to present to me, oh, yeah, he was afraid of going there. Paul Day did the same thing. You may not know who Paul Day is, but some of you know he's a Calvinist, and I saw him in other exchanges, and yeah, he's welcome to his opinion. That's fine, but he kept emphasizing how I wanted to avoid it. Well, I wasn't keen on going there because it wasn't the topic. But there's this attempt to present it as if I don't want to talk about other beliefs that I have. My thing with the Church of Christ is, I think the Church of Christ has lots of things right. I agree with lots of Church of Christ people. I have over the years I have come to disagree with traditional Church of Christ views on several significant things. The Church of Christ don't always like me because I don't say the same things, and they're welcome to not like me or not agree with me or whatever it may be. I am an independent person. I'm not interested in pleasing any particular group, but the Church of Christ has a lot going for it that I agree with. That's why we share so many beliefs. But I get criticized by Church of Christ people too. But this idea that I want to avoid it, or I'm squeamish about some of my views that align with the Church of Christ, just not so. Now, what I tell people sometimes, I say, well, if we're going to do a debate, don't put Church of Christ on the thumbnail. That's because people do not understand what I would mean by Church of Christ. Because people assume that I believe every traditional view of the Churches of Christ. I don't. Because I just think independently. I mean, it's just that simple. So sometimes I tell people, well, if you say Church of Christ, they're going to assume things. And it's not a debate. This was not a debate between a Church of Christ view and a Calvinist view, or this was just a debate on Romans 9. My exegesis was not distinct to the Churches of Christ. Churches of Christ would agree with my exegesis of Romans 9. So would a lot of people. So would Calvinists, if you do not bring Calvinism into it. So Church of Christ had nothing to do with it. So we weren't debating. It's very simple. See, Dr. White knows. It's very simple. We weren't debating once saved, always saved. Church of Christ are not by any means the ones who are only believing in that you can lose your salvation. That by no means is unique to them. I happen to agree with it. You know, let me be fair here. Well, it's a fair question now. So someone asked, could I specifically ask what you disagree in regards to traditional views? So my traditional views, one, I believe there are saved people in what are known as denominations. I may believe Calvinists are saved. I don't think they're necessarily not saved just because of their Calvinism. I think it's a bad theology. But I think they do not mean to, impugn the character of God. That's why they disagree that they make him the author of sin, but they do by implication. I think it's a bad theology. That is not traditional Church of Christ. Church of Christ will disagree with me night and day over that. Also, I believe, so for example, he was wanting to question me on baptism. I believe per Acts 2:38 that baptism is commanded upon conversion and for the forgiveness of sins. Do I believe that I have no problem saying that if someone dies before baptism and they have faith, they're going to be saved, because we're justified by faith. Baptism, in so much as it's an act of faith, is why we're still justified by faith. But I don't believe, people have these conversations. What if someone's hand came out of the water and nobody realized it? And you see it on, the questions, you see it on video. 30 years later, hey, they weren't fully submerged. Well, and by the way, and that's not necessarily a traditional view. But I do not take the traditional view that John chapter 3, verse 5 is about baptism. I do not necessarily believe that the washing of regeneration in Titus is about baptism. I've got videos on that. Those are not traditional views of the Church of Christ. John chapter 3 may be about baptism. I don't think that it is. But that's my thing. I just think how I think. So, but thinking that one of the biggest ones is I don't believe you should be a Baptist, a Pentecostal person. I believe we should get rid of these denominational distinctions. That's just why I'm not one. But believing there are saved people in these churches is an absolute. It just is. It's a no-no for Church of Christ, traditionally speaking. And I don't blame them for not liking my theology on that, because I know where they're coming from. I believe people should come out of denominationalism, but everybody's got something wrong. I'm just here to tell you. Everybody's got something wrong. If they're following Jesus and obeying them to the best that they know, and they're trying to increase their knowledge, and they have faith, and they've been baptized. Oh, that's another traditional view, by the way, you asked. And I'm not going to spend so much time on this. This is the last point I'll make on this. The Church of Christ, the traditional view is you have to be baptized believing it is for the forgiveness of sins. I believe that if you're baptized because Jesus commanded you to be, that's the most significant thing. If I preach the gospel to somebody, Jesus, the Son of God, you have to repent and you have to be baptized. And if I say it like that, Jesus has commanded you to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ, and they do that, even though I didn't say, by the way, you have to believe it's for the forgiveness of sins too, by the way. If they're obeying the command of their king because they have faith in him and they want to do what's right, I believe that's the most significant thing that matters. They've been baptized. But now, not everybody agrees with me. Church of Christ traditionally will absolutely disagree with me, and I get it. I don't blame anybody for disagreeing with me, because people do it all the time. But those are some of the ideas. Okay, so back to this. I wasn't trying to avoid anything. I wasn't sensitive to anything. Dr. White, you asked about baptism, and it wasn't on topic, and I said it's not on topic, and I said, but if you want to talk about it, let's do it. You were the one off topic.
If I wanted to derail that debate and get off into stuff, I could have, but I didn't. I wanted to stay focused on Romans 9.
Then why didn't you? That is so inconsistent with what you did. You did derail the debate if I hadn't kept it on it. I mean, he is so not self-aware. He is self-unaware here. Everybody listen and go back and watch in the cross-examination when he started asking me about justification. And we know that he was getting to baptism. And I said, you're asking me about baptism. Okay, I said, that's not the topic, but we could talk about it. And then he did not push to talk about it. So no, he wanted to derail the debate in his words. I'm the one who said it's not on topic, and because of that, he didn't push it, because he knows it was not on topic. And then he accuses me of being off topic. Dr. White, you have to be more self-aware in a debate. You've done almost 200 of these things. I think that you could be.
And especially in its context. So the reality is he's the one going off. He's the one who went off into weird stuff. And
I'm the one going off in the weird stuff? Okay, I would like to know, what's an example of that? What's an example of that? My opening speech dealt with Romans chapter 9. Nearly every verse within the first 24 that I got to, I talked about. Okay, my rebuttal responded to things you said. That's my job in a rebuttal. And then in cross-examination, my first question had to do with Romans 9. Patience was there, and you had emphasized patience. I challenged your consistency and your logic. I talked about free will in regard to what Dr. White has argued for in regard to Romans 9. It's not of him who wills. I cited verse 18. Okay, you prove your accusation, Dr. White. You give an example where I talked about something weird that was not related to Romans 9. All the while, I have repeatedly given the examples where you did just that. You are being inconsistent.
it just seems that none of these folks understand. If you read open theists, if you read...
yeah, and so he has much chagrin because I was having a discussion that was very friendly with someone he says is an open theist. I don't know Warren McGrew's theology that much. I think we agree on certain things that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's things that we don't. Warren McGrew has said he doesn't call himself an open theist. He talked about dynamic knowledge or something like that. So Warren McGrew will speak for himself. Listen, Warren McGrew is kind to me. We agreed on these issues. I'll be kind to him. So I'm sorry, Dr. White, but I'm not going to push somebody away or not be friendly to them or avoid them just because you don't like them. Now, to his credit, Dr. White wasn't saying I should. He's just guilty by association. He doesn't like somebody he had a conversation with, and so, he should have been harder on me in the debate. Well, go harder next time. Let's have another one. You can go hard all you want. But that's okay. I mean, I will deal with people according to my interactions and my understanding. I've got no problem with Warren McGrew. So that's just unfortunate that you were so put off by it. Dynamic omniscience. Yeah, that's it. Now, I'm aware of open theology, its main beliefs. Warren McGrew's particular beliefs, I'm not aware of. He said that he doesn't go by open theist. He goes by dynamic omniscience, okay? But open theism in general, I've talked with open theists. I'm aware of what they believe, and I have a disagreement. But that's okay. You talked to Dr. Michael Brown, and you disagree on the charismatic stuff. You love Michael Brown. And he was associated with Benny Hinn at one point. He believes in the charismatic gifts, but you get along with him just fine.
There I am. I still need to fix that, Rich. I'm so teeny tiny down there, and you need to send me written instructions on, because it's not gonna stick. Obviously, it doesn't stick. I don't know why, but anyway, if you read people who really defend creature libertarian freedom. By the way, that came up. He asked me, did Adam have libertarian freedom? I said yes, and then immediately said, I mean that within the creaturely realm, it's under the decree of God.
Well, who else besides God is in the creaturely realm? Isn't it a given that Adam was a creature? Yes, when we're talking about libertarian free will, he obviously doesn't understand it very well, I guess. He should, by now, know. If Adams has libertarian free will, I already know we're talking about a creature. We know we're talking about creatures. Yeah, I'm not sure what Nathan Couch is talking about. James White did have that weird moment in the debate in which AK, brought up earlier where he seemed to think that because one view is wrong, therefore you must accept the extreme opposite is true. Yeah, there was one moment where I said, oh, yeah, that was with the patience. I said in my rebuttal that God, in Calvinism's view, and James White's view, is having patience with his own decree. And his rebuttal to that was, so there can't be a decree. There can't be a decree. No, I believe there's a decree. I don't believe he decrees every thought, motive, and deed unchangeably like you do.
I'm just saying he didn't have a fallen nature. Man, everyone's gone nuts, and they're ignoring everything else I said about it. It's almost as bad as the Ignatius thing.
Yeah, you stumbled there, Dr. White. That's part of it. You basically conceded defeat, if nothing else there. And so Dr. White's having a hard time because he gave the game away. That is a huge inconsistency. It's a huge victory as far as truth. You gave the game away. Because now you can't be consistent in the future and argue that God isn't sovereign if man has free will. You can argue that man doesn't have free will, but you can't argue that he's not sovereign, which is something you have done. I can pull up the quotes if I need to.
The Heschmeyer debate. So
James White is feeling the the backlash over that, but rightfully so.
Well, rather than dealing with what the debate was actually about. But can God survive trillions of free will decisions? And so if you read Open Theists, you know that any violation of human free will is repugnant to them. And they just, the idea that it would happen over and over and over again. Now, Richardson did not give us any kind of coherent explanation. All he kept saying is, well, God has a way to get it done. Well, that's nice. That's cool, but...
Yeah, because you were asking me and you were questioning. See, this is so silly, Dr. White. You were questioning me, and I had to give answers. If you wanted to give me the floor and the time to bring this all out, oh, man, would I have loved to do it. And I will still yet. But I'm trying to be appreciative and respectful of your debate, or rather your time, answer the question. And if you want me to go off and explain how this stuff works, and by the way, I've given you an example. Someone earlier, what's his name? Talked about hardening Pharaoh's heart. He said, amazes me, people can read. No, that's not what I was looking for. James assumes Pharaoh hadn't already hardened himself to where the potter changed it from a vessel of honor to dishonor. Pharaoh had pride, he had vengeance, he had hatred, he had evil in his heart, and God incited it against him to push his buttons. There's one way God does it. I could answer the question for you, but you were questioning me. And so I was answering your question. God can get his purposes done. So once again, he's saying Richardson didn't give us a coherent answer as to how God could do these things. Again, it seems that Dr. White finds it unfathomable that God could accomplish his purpose if there are so many human free will decisions. He can do it with one or two with Adam, but if you pile them up, God can't do it. So when he says A.K. Richardson couldn't tell us how God does this, which basically means God couldn't do it. Well, do you not believe that God is sovereign enough, wise enough, powerful enough that he can still accomplish his purposes, even if man has billions and bajillions of free will choices? If so, then you can see the same point that I did.
What do you mean he has a way to get... How can you call it libertarian free will if it is subject to the decree of God in the sense that they are rebel sinners, cannot do what's pleasing to God, and God is going to accomplish his purpose at the time...
Well, then that wouldn't be libertarian free will, of course, if they are, what do you say there? Fallen? Oh, I know
they are rebel sinners, cannot do what's pleasing to God.
Cannot do. Now, of course, I know what he means by those words. He means total depravity, because that's how he interprets the passage. I affirm what the Bible says. By the way, Romans 8, cannot do what's pleasing. He assumes that's about the reprobate. That's a warning to Christians as much as it is to anybody else. But see, he disagrees with the interpretation. That's fine. That would be the whole point. We have a different interpretation. But what he means is total depravity, of course. Everything that he believes about total inability, the T of tulip. Well, that's not libertarian free will if you get the T with tulip, of course.
And God is going to accomplish his purpose at the time he wishes to accomplish his purpose. So you can't have options A, B, C, and D. And you've heard, those of you who listen, I've debated people who said, yeah, Paul could have said no.
And I don't know if he brings it up. Remember, at this point, I don't know what James White is saying. I haven't heard this at this point. So I lost my train of thought there. Let me back it up a bit.
Options A, B, C, and D. And you've heard, those of you who listen, I've debated people who said, yeah, Paul could have said no.
Yeah. Okay, so, well, first of all, he did ask me that. He asked about Pharaoh. He asked about Paul. I hope he recounts the answer that I gave. Paul could have said no just as much as Jonah the prophet said no. Is that going to stop God? Again, but see, that's unfathomable to Dr. White, because Dr. White can't imagine how God would do what he wants to do if man says no. Because, again, he thinks that free will makes us God. We're not God. See, Jonah said no. But you know who else? I have to credit my wife for this. She mentioned it, and it's a great example. Boy, I wish that I would have thought of this in the debate. You know who else said no repeatedly? Remember when God was telling Moses what he wanted him to do, and Moses said, no, send somebody else. I can't do it. And God would say, I'm going to tell you what to say. I'm going to be with your mouth. And he kept saying, please send somebody else. And if I recall right, doesn't the text say that God's wrath was kindled against Moses? But anyway, Moses kept saying, no, I don't want to do it. Didn't it still happen? Didn't that still occur? Didn't God get what he wanted with Moses, even though Moses kept saying no? Now, did God adjust the way he would have originally done it? He absolutely did. He wasn't going to send Moses' brother with him. He wasn't going to send Aaron. I mean, that only came up when Moses kept saying, I don't want to do it. I can't speak to Pharaoh. And he said, I'll send Aaron, he'll be your spokesman. So God has no problem adjusting some things. He's going to get what he wants. Now, for example, if God did not want Aaron to go, and it was his purpose for Moses to go alone, guess what? That would have happened also. He would have said, no, you're going to go, and you're going to go alone. And God would have brought it about, just like he did with Jonah. He got Jonah to go. But God doesn't mind accommodating certain ways. You know why? Because God hasn't purposed every thought, motive, and deed.
And then God would have gone with somebody else. And then if they had said no, he would have gone to somebody else, and over again. That's the consistent view.
You notice Dr. White, at least so far, we're not done listening, hasn't brought up what I said. God would have to have gone with somebody else. Did God go with somebody else? No, he still got Moses to go. And he evidently didn't mind adjusting it, but he still got Moses to go. Because God wasn't going to change that. When he wanted to send Jonah, did he get somebody else to go, Dr. White? Is that my view? Are you interacting yet? Maybe he will once we hit play. Are you interacting with my view here? Are you telling them what I said, that no, God can do exactly what he wants?
But all I was trying to say, in the debate, by the way, I did an entire hour-long program before I did this on someone else's webcast. All I was trying to say was, if you affirm that, for example, the timing of the crucifixion, that Herod, Pontius Pilate, so on, were to be involved with it, that Judas was to be the son of perdition, the number of quote-unquote free will decisions that would have to be completely controlled by God is immense. Now, maybe they're trying to be Molinists, but I don't think they are. And Molinism then depends on the ungrounded, unfounded concept of middle knowledge. So they're just being inconsistent. They're just admitting, yes, God will accomplish his decree, but he will mysteriously do it somehow without violating anyone's libertarian free will, which is not under his decree or something. I don't know. But hey, if you're hanging out with McGrew and
if I'm hanging
Layton, out, I should have obviously been significantly more direct. But we'll get to that in a second.
So, what a proper way to behave, Dr. White. In other words, despite everything that I actually said in the debate, and as respectable as I was to you, because I associated and talked with people on a point that we agree on or even disagree on, because you don't like them, so now my name is Mud? Well, my name could be Mud all day long, Dr. White. I was nice to you too, by the way. This wasn't a one-way street. I was nice to you. I didn't have to be. I could have gone there and I could have pushed you on those weak points harder than I did. And some people said I should have. Some people said I should have said something when you had that cheap line about you didn't know what I was talking about and neither did I, trying to do the Trump thing, which didn't land in the room. I mean, I could have raked you over the coals for how unclassy that was. I didn't need to. I kind of let that one fall under its own weight. I could have been just as pushy to you as you were to me. And by the way, I would have rather you gone a little harder because I wanted it to be a little hard because I wanted to push you hard, but I didn't want you to have the reaction that you had to Steve Gregg, which was, no, let's not do this. Let's do something different. That's Dr. White, you've done enough of these debates and you are old enough to know you can do better than what you're doing. To treat me like this as respectable as I was to you, just because you don't like Warren McGrew? But anyway, I mean, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to look out for who Dr. White doesn't like? Well, no, I mean, I don't care who you don't like. I was asked to go on his program. I don't have a problem with Warren McGrew. I treat people independently. I don't have a problem with them until there's a problem to be had. So why would I? Me and Leighton Flowers don't agree on everything. From what I understand, he believes in once saved, always saved. That's okay with me. He could have that belief. It doesn't. We're talking about things we agree on. Hey, we could talk about things we disagree on. That's what I did with you, Dr. White. And your behavior now is embarrassing. You don't have to like Warren McGrew. But anyway, I frankly don't care if Dr. White wants to be that way. That's up to him. If that closes any future possibilities of further discussions, I thought, see, the only real shame in this, I don't mind what Dr. White thinks of me. If he doesn't want to talk, this is probably an excuse not to talk. But let me tell you something. There was so much positive responses from Calvinists and others of how much they liked the interaction. Dr. White is smart, and I believe I know these things well enough that we have such great exchange that I think there's so much benefit and profit to someone like me and Dr. White having an exchange that it's a shame that he could be so shallow as to say, you went on his program, I don't like him, your name is mud. Well, that's fine as far as me and Dr. White goes, but it's a shame that cuts off interaction that so many people benefited from. Now, you Calvinists, so many of you enjoyed the debate and said how much interaction should be like this. Do you agree with Dr. White's behavior here? Listen, I'm not personally bothered. He can dislike me. That's fine. I went through most of my life with... before the debate, a couple months before the debate, I was at the point where I thought, okay, this is never going to happen. I'm never going to have an exchange with the greatest defender of Calvinism there is out there. Not going to happen. Oh well, God will open up opportunities. And that's what I said. God will open up opportunities as he sees fit. And then all of a sudden, someone called and said, hey, here's a debate you could have with Dr. White. I said, great. So I went most of my life without Dr. White even knowing who I was, and so what he thinks of me is fine. But man, I think maybe it's because I think that I got so much good for the truth out of this. Maybe he doesn't feel that way, and he's looking. I don't know his motives. Maybe he's looking for a reason not to be pressured to have exchanges in the future. But I don't know. Yes, Clint Little says this is nonsense that God must perform billions of operations to accomplish something. God can just do what he wants in a moment. Absolutely true. And the example I gave, here it is. Magnus Carlsen, arguably the greatest chess player in history right now, who's younger than I am, I believe. Maybe he's the same age, I'm not sure. He does not have to determine the moves on both sides of the chess player. He's that good. Well, God is much better at life. He doesn't have to determine every move. But for Dr. White, at some point, Adam can have a few free will choices, but you pile them up enough, and man, it's going to be hard.
And there we go. And so let's talk about the debates. That's why we did the Louisiana Loop. And let's talk about the debates. Let's talk about the debate. Is the King James Version?
Yeah. So it's unfortunate that he felt that way. I want to circle back to the most important point here. If you're a Calvinist, now let's do this. If you're a Calvinist and you want to ask me or push me on something, go ahead, put at AK, and I'll try to spot you, okay? And so I will try to pay attention, okay? So if you're a Calvinist, this is your moment. And seriously, I want to interact with your questions. If you want to push me on things I said in the debate, if you want to push my consistency, now's your time. I could open up the phone line, but I haven't done that in so long. And anyway, I got a different number. So, okay, so this is what it comes down to. There was an objective going into Romans 9 that there would be with any passage that you are debating, whether it's John 6 or whatever it may be. And it is exegete the passage, demonstrate the proper exegesis or interpretation of that passage, and showing how yours is consistent. In this particular debate, listen, I've done this several times. Me and David Lewis did a rapid debate over 3 passages each. Romans 8 came up in there. It was really over once saved, always saved. I think the predestination, that passage, that was a part of it. The chain of redemption, as they say. I forget, John 10 was one of them, and the other one was, why can't I ever remember the other one? But we debated these passages. I've had exegetical debates before. I don't really remember what the other one is. That I at least did that. I think there was another exegetical debate I did. But I'm very much focused on debate rules. I'm a stickler for how it's done. So you're not going to, as easily as White is trying to do, accuse me of not following the proper way and not think that I've come with receipts. Okay. In this particular debate, when I am going into a passage in which my opponent has used for a proof text, I'll exegete it. And generally what happens is it becomes where my opponent is having to do more work than I am because he's the one. So, for example, let me explain to you what I'm talking about. When I debated David Lewis, he brought 3 passages that he felt, he picked 3 passages, I picked 3 passages, and the way we did it in that debate is I would exegete the passage, then he would exegete it, and then we would cross-examine one another. But when it was his passages, he was picking passages that he believed demonstrated his theology in which we disagreed on. I think it was once saved, always saved, perseverance of the saints. Okay, so really more of the work was going to be done by him on his passages. So it would not necessarily be the case that when we were giving exegesis on the particular passages that he picked, it may not and was not always the case that he would disagree with the things I was saying and the way I was exegeting it as far as my conclusions. Except to say, well, but it also means this. Yeah, I agree with you, AK, what you said, basically, but it also means this, and thus he would give the point for his theology. Now, that's the nature of an exegetical debate. How I exegeted Romans 9, which I believe is the proper way to do it, Dr. White did not find too much to disagree with. That's because properly exegeted, yes, unless you're a dispensationalist, Calvinist, properly exegeted, Dr. White's not going to have big problems with my conclusions. The problem comes in when he says, but it also demonstrates these things, unconditional election, or whatever. That is a part of his Calvinistic theology. Then the onus becomes, you prove that. I exegete, and people say, well, but you were just debating Calvinism. Yes, because it was the Calvinistic points that we disagreed on. There was nothing else to debate, my friends. So to my Calvinist friends, I want you to know, when you keep saying, AK, you were basically just debating Calvinism, that's because those are the only parts of Romans 9 that we disagree on, is the Calvinistic interpretations that Dr. White has. That's the point. You have to learn how an exegetical debate's supposed to go. And evidently so does Dr. White, because he didn't stick with Romans 9, and he turns around and says that I didn't stick with it. That's how it works. So it could be, it could be this as well. It could have been the case that my particular exegesis of the passage was such where he says that's not right either. And thus we're debating particularly two types of theology. So a dispensationalist, for example, is going to disagree with things that both Dr. White and I would agree on when it comes to Romans 9. And so when both of you bring an exegesis that neither one of you agree on, well, then you are battling exegesis. When it came to this one, he didn't have anything that he disagreed with me on. And so it was really just about his Calvinistic interpretations. That's just the way that it works. You have to learn how this works. Oh, but Romans 8 is relevant. Yeah, but it's debated. But the particular things in Romans 8 we debate, so you can't spend half the time on Romans 8. You just can't do it. That's not the way that it works. In the end, I did everything that was my obligation to do in this debate. I stuck with the passage. I got Dr. White back on the passage when he would veer off of it. I exegeted more of it than he did, and he turns around and accuses me of doing it. Unbelievable. But that's the way it is, all right? Just the way that it is. Seems Dr. White is spiraling after the debate. Well, I know he's getting a lot of pushback over conceding that Adam had libertarian free will. That's big. That's a huge admission. And to me, that was worth tons. And yes, he's having trouble. I would do it again. He might use the, well, no, you were with Warren McGrew, I can't do it. Well, that's fine. That's fine. He doesn't have to debate me again. I got a lot of mileage out of that one. All right, so nobody has said, has sent anything my way. So I'm surprised. Calvinists kept saying they want questions. Well, I guess there's not a lot of Calvinists who got questions here in the side chat. But, okay, so Nathan Couch says, this was another weird point. Is God omnipotent and omniscient? Is God incapable of handling the chaos of humanity? How pitiful, honestly, the creator of the universe in that framing. Of course, I believe that he can. He does a great job of it. Yeah, Psalm 19:1 says, getting that admission from J.W. from White on Adam was huge. And it was. Really was. Psalm 19:1 says, yes, Moses and Aaron is a great example. Okay, it really is. And that's my wife's example. She mentioned it just the other day, and I thought, that's brilliant. That might be better than Jonah. Well, both of them are really great. Yeah. So Nathan Couch says, yeah, that last comment of mine was regarding White's bewilderment that God could handle billions of human decisions. Yeah. Yeah, that's his hang-up. He just doesn't know how it could be possible. But yeah, Moses said no several times. At one point, and White was asking me, well, could Pharaoh have said, and yes, he did. He did. He said it several times. Several times, Pharaoh said, okay, I'll let him go. But he still had pride, right? And God holding back or pulling back and showing mercy by taking his plagues away was humiliating. And it showed defeat, and it showed how much more powerful God was. And the fact that he showed mercy to Pharaoh, that's humiliating, and it made Pharaoh dig in his heels. Clint Little says, God has never forced anyone to do anything if we take the Bible as our evidence of his way of operating. Well, depending on what you mean. I do believe God forces people to do things. I take it you probably don't mean it in the way that I'm talking, but he doesn't determine man's will. So, for example, God forced Pharaoh to be in this situation. Pharaoh was not asking to be God's pawn or his instrument. That's a force. He did force. If by force you mean demand and require, which I don't think that you do mean, then he does do that. Let's see. So, Chris Quilliams, how often do you for this show, AK? I'm a Grace Through Faith CFC member, so I find you refreshing as a lot teach Grace Through Faith, teach faith plus works. Well, my view is that baptism is an act of faith. I mean, it's justification through faith is what it is. So how often? Well, I try to do it every Monday. I was successful on one Monday. We're doing it Tuesday. I try to do it as I can. So Mondays, Tuesdays, what I'm shooting for. But thanks for being a part of it. Theology matters. Why was God angry with Moses if he determined him to be reluctant? Yeah, that would be inconsistent. And that's all throughout the Bible. That's the same idea as God being patient with his own decree. And it says something, and it's very important about the Q&A too. Some of the questions were great. The practicality of it. When the Bible talks about God having compassion in Chronicles with his people and sending them prophet after prophet after prophet, it's not compassion to send prophets when you will not allow them to say yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, but I think the debate was successful. Now, I suppose we can go into I'm definitely going to be done by 8, or that's my objective. I like the Q&A too. Let's look at some of the Q&A. I think this is it.
That you have a different perspective.
Now, by the way, I always go back and rewatch the debates because I'm always wanting to improve. And I'm always kicking myself and saying I should have done this, I should have done that. Every time, every single time. One thing on a practical note that I could always improve, and it's always a struggle. Boy, do I move. It's just the way I've always been. I am a mover. I'm constantly shifting and moving, and I got my hands going. I don't mind moving somewhat because I think it makes it a little bit more visually interesting. But I do believe I really got to work on being more, and I do. I always try to work on it, but it's hard for me. It is so my personality to shift. And you see it right here on the show. I'm constantly shifting. I constantly shift. It's not the most important thing, but I would like to get more control over it than I do. But I know because people in the side chat were saying, why is AK so jittery? And it's just me. And the funny thing is, I have never held a mic and spoken. And so when I get there and they say, okay, here's your mic, and I see that I'm going to be holding a mic. I've never held a mic, and I thought, do you guys know how much I gesture with my hands when I talk? I thought, well, I don't know how this is going to work. And that was I was never nervous for the debate, but at that point I thought, this might not be good when it comes to audio. And sure enough, I'm holding it out here at some points. I'm blowing into it at some points. I hit something at some point. I try to, especially now. Here's where it does matter a little. If people think you're nervous, well, it doesn't communicate confidence, right? Now, I am very confident in the things I said. I was not nervous at all. I was never intimidated. But if people think you're nervous, it just affects how they take your message. And especially when someone like White is very still, it really magnifies your movements because I'm constantly moving around. And I laughed at myself because I was watching I think it was my opening speech. I'm not sure. It could have been a rebuttal. And I moved to one side, I moved to the other, and it really looked like I was dancing a jig. And I laughed out loud at myself, and I thought, yeah, it looks like you're dancing up there. That's just the way that it is, I guess. Have you read C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity? I have not. I mean, I know he's a very well-known figure. I just never read it. And by the way, White called me a Pelagian. I knew that was coming at some point. I don't care what you guys call me. I don't know much about Pelagius. I know nothing. I don't know enough about Pelagius to know what he believed. And if the only people representing what he believed is his opponents, like Calvinists or whatever, well, I don't know how much of that to take seriously. You can call me a Pelagian if you want. It's not my label. Semi-Pelagian. I've been called an Arminian. I've been called all kinds of things. Is it true? Yeah, it's easy to call me a Pelagian and not be able to demonstrate the falsehood of my beliefs in the debate, Dr. White. And when Calvinists say that, well, I'm here to say, you say it as if Calvinism is better. You can call me whatever you want. Is it true and is it biblical? But no, I said that because I just don't read a lot about figures. I don't know much about C.S. Lewis, but I know he's pretty smart. Clinton got his ability to convince like no other being. Absolutely. He just does not to the point of brute force. Example, grab someone and shove them in water. Baptism, yeah. But choosing against God could be uncomfortable. Yeah. Theology Matters. They gave White the headset and you the mic. No, actually, White brought his own. That was his. That's all they had. And so I learned a lesson right there. Definitely. That's the first thing White said is, I brought my own. And I thought, boy, I should do that. Because what he had is what they gave me at the 12-5 church in Jonesboro. Loved it. Loved it. I love to be free. I told Trey Fisher, you know, when we were in talks before, I said, do you got wireless mics? Because I love to drift. I didn't drift too much because the podium was right there and, you know, there wasn't a lot of room. But I love to drift. Maybe a little bit too much. I believe these things, of course, I talk about what I don't like about myself because we're human, and I'm not afraid to talk about these things. I think they're funny. I'll tell you a funny story. When, you know, it was around 2010, I don't know, somewhere around those years, maybe before, I started doing videos, which are not available anymore, but, and in the videos, I would stand. But I'm much better at it now. But I would walk over here, I would drift because I'm constantly moving and I would walk off camera. And every time I would try to be more still and stand in one spot, I lose clarity about what I'm talking about. And so I would then get off and then here again, I go moving around. So what I would do, because you couldn't see my feet, I wrapped duct tape around my ankles so that I could not walk as I spoke. It worked. Now I have a little bit better control. I don't mind some movement because I don't believe in just being boring. But that just goes to tell you, this is my thing. I am such a mover. When I sleep, I just turn and I move. It's just, I can't sit still. That is torture to me to be still. But I'm trying to get better. Even now, I'm conscious of keeping my hands on the desk as much as I can anyway. Anyway, this is part of it, right? And the other thing is I can speak really fast. You know, when I'm talking right now, I'm consciously speaking slow. And if I don't watch it, boy, I can go a mile a minute and I start stuttering. But it's just part of it, you know. Everybody's got these parts of their mannerisms. But not the most important things. But yeah, absolutely, if I do this some more. And let me tell you something also. This is only my third in-person debate, 2 of which have been made available public. This is so much more better and effective. I almost am on the mind now to do very few online debates. This is what I want to do. If you want to do a debate, this is much more effective. This is what I want to do. Somebody host it and I think this is the route I want to go. Nathan Couch says, you just need to make your shifting look comfortable. I had a pastor who would go do a comfort shift when answering a question. I found it helpful to his points. Yeah. Well, a comfort shift. Yeah, I just need to, be still would help me. It's just the way of it. All right. So what was I going to do? Okay. What time is it? 7:47. All right. We got a few minutes left. Let's do some Q&A.
Predestination. He asked, for AK, define your definition of predestination. You have a minute.
The definition of the word means to decide beforehand. That's simply what it means. The English, pretty much the same, except, you decide the destiny beforehand, or rather the destination. So God has, in Ephesians 1, for example, God has decided beforehand what? What does the text say he decides beforehand? That those who are in Christ will be, blameless, adopted, justified. So he has decided beforehand that those who are in Christ will have these qualifications. And that happens when you are a Christian. Because of your faith, God mercifully justifies you, and there will be the adoption. You will be made holy. And predestination in Romans 8, well, it's whom he foreknows, the church, is decided beforehand by God to be conformed to Christ in his resurrection.
30 seconds? Well, actually what Ephesians...
Yeah, so predestination just means to decide beforehand. I believe God has decided in Romans 8, for example, that whom he foreknows, that's the church, he decides he's got certain purposes with the church. In Romans 8, the purpose is that they will conform to the image of his son, which I believe in context is about the glory of the resurrection. It's about the resurrection anyway. And so Ephesians 1, he predestines that believers, those who are in Christ, will what? Will be adopted, which will be blameless. But that's different than saying he predestines unconditionally certain believers to become Christians. All right. Truth in Telos Ministries. I have a question. The Jews who rejected Messiah in the first century, when they die, do they go to heaven? No. If you reject Messiah, Jesus said, if you do not have me, you do not have the Father. So no, they did not. If they rejected him. Unless of course, if they reject him at one moment, but come to believe, as was the case, that's different. So, where are we? All right, we got that one.
One says, just as he chose us in him, and the result of our being chosen in Christ is that these things will happen. That's what...
It isn't, yeah. Did I not say in my answer that he chose us in Christ, believers in Christ? So that's what I said.
That's what salvation comes from. But Paul's...
Okay. Questions before the clips here at this point, but he says, but aren't they the vessels of dishonor? Well, not every single individual, perhaps, but yes, the Jews... by and large, as a nation, were used as vessels of dishonor. But that doesn't mean any particular individual. So it's kind of like this, and this is part of it. So, just as in Jeremiah 18, God can take an evil nation and purpose certain things with it, using it for dishonor. And he says in Jeremiah 18, if they turn from their wickedness and become righteous, just as he used in the analogy of the potter and clay, he could reshape the purpose. Okay, I'll use you for something different. Now, he's got purposes for wicked people. He's got purposes for righteous people, believers. And if you become a righteous person, he will use you in the purposes that he has. That's exactly the point that it said. So that would be my answer. And by the way, we can get to the carnally minded question.
The point is, we're the ones who are chosen
out of the elect and could not
at some point
be saved in the Reformed construct.
So he asked, Truth and Telos Ministries asked so you can see being a vessel of honor or dishonor is soteriology. That's what I said in my opening. I said in my opening, verse 24 tells us who the vessels of honor are. Now, of course, you may not have saw the debate, I suppose, but I said, verse 24 tells us who the vessels of honor are. It is those who are Christians, believers. And I said redemption. This is the honor that it's talking about. God will be glorified in redemption. And I said that the vessels of dishonor are unbelievers. And if you're an unbeliever, well, obviously you are not going to be saved. The whole passage is soteriology. And by the way, I appreciate you mentioning that, because Dr. White said at some point, and maybe I went over it, I don't know. He said at some point that he mentioned something about part of it, about my exegesis being soteriology. I believe the whole passage is soteriological. Go watch my opening speech, and you will see me reference salvation, promises to save. So Dr. White missed it. The whole thing is soteriological.
Hello, Mr. Richardson. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Brody Alds, and I heard baptism briefly mentioned earlier, and I was just curious.
This is irrelevant.
Which is the Molinist perspective. And I did a debate on that in Houston last year, and I swore I'm never going to do it again because Molinism gives me a headache and everybody else a headache too. So, but no.
Now we get some questions coming in that we can interact with. I was playing the Q&A just because we weren't getting too many. So he says, so you concede being a vessel of honor and dishonor is I don't know. I read that one already. But God made them who they are in Romans 8:9, didn't he? He made them vessels of honor and dishonor. He didn't make the clay evil. He didn't make the clay honorable or dishonorable. He took clay and he makes it honorable and he makes it dishonorable. If you go to Jeremiah 18, it's the same idea. Okay? It's the same idea. So in Romans 9, a vessel of honor is one being used for honorable purpose. That's the metaphor. That's the analogy. You have to remember the clay is not the same thing as the vessel into which the clay is made. Okay? He takes one lump and he makes it into a vessel of honor or dishonor. We know who that is. So in the metaphor, the vessel, this is what a lot of people don't understand, and I think Calvinists have a hard time with it. The vessel, according to the imagery of the metaphor, is the purpose. That's what it stands for. Now, if you take clay and you make a cup and you set it there, you've now got a purpose for the cup. Your purpose is to use it for drinking. This is a purpose beforehand. You obviously make the cup and now you've set it for a particular purpose, right? Well, the cup represents in the metaphor the purpose, the pre-planned function that God has use of, or will make use of. The clay represents the people themselves, nations, individuals, doesn't matter. The clay isn't made honorable or dishonorable as clay. He takes clay and uses it for honor or dishonor. We know that the clay believers are made for honorable use. That's what the text says. Unbelievers, the text isn't about, and Paul is not discussing whether he takes clay and makes it a believer or not. It's about using clay for purposes. And we know from Romans 9 that believers he makes honorable use out of, and unbelievers he makes dishonorable use out of, prepared for destruction. What it is not communicating, because it would be anachronistic, is whether he determines how the clay is going to be, if it's going to be a believer or an unbeliever. Now, so for example, if you don't understand that, you're going to miss the whole thing. So, for example, when he's using the potter and clay language in Romans 9, Paul says, he represents the clay as saying, why have you made me like this? What is the this? Why have you made me evil? Why have you made me righteous? Why did you make me a believer? No. The metaphor is, why have you made me like this? In other words, the particular vessel which represents the purpose for which he's using you. But the purpose does not mean it's unconditional. It is not communicating that one way or the other. So, for example, in Jeremiah 18, let's just go there and look. Time is it? 7:56. Got a couple minutes left here. The word which came to Jeremiah from Yahweh, saying, Arise and go down to the potter's house, and there I will make you hear my words. Then I went down to the potter's house, and behold, he was making something on the wheel. But the vessel that he was making of clay was ruined. You notice that according to the metaphor here, the potter does not make one vessel permanently from the beginning. It actually changes from one vessel to the other because he's changing purposes with it. So when Paul is talking about using this metaphor, you have to understand that the vessel is the purpose, and the purpose is not unconditional. Even if it were unconditional, it can't tell you that in Romans 9 because Paul doesn't deal with that concept. At least in that spot. He does later, of course, when he talks about the Gentiles found righteousness through faith. Okay, so what does he say? He said the vessel he was making of clay was ruined in the hand of the potter. It was ruined in the hand of the potter, so he turned around and made it into another vessel. Imagine that. Why? Because he's changing purposes. Now, he's always got a purpose of honor for wicked people, according to Jeremiah. Wicked nations, he's got pre-planned purposes. The purposes still exist. There's still a purpose of dishonor he has for wicked nations. But this particular clay, he uses for a different purpose. He has one purpose for it, but then he shifts purposes. How can he do that if there was always one certain purpose, always unchangeable? Well, at least in Jeremiah 18, it's not. Now, why does he change purposes? Well, that's the very point of the analogy. He says, Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as this potter does? But according to Calvinist theology, no, you cannot. No, you cannot, God, because everything is unchangeably determined from the beginning. The purpose of the clay here, the first purpose, let's go to this. But the vessel that he was making of clay, he already had it as one vessel. Let's say that it was a cup. In Calvinist theology, it's always a cup. It can't change because it's unchangeable. It's an unchangeable decree. So when God says, Can I not, O house of Israel, deal with you as this potter does? The answer, as consistently from a Calvinist, is no, you cannot. Because that's not what you say you do. Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand are you in my hand, O house of Israel. At one moment I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to uproot, to tear down, or to make it perish. But if that nation, or let's see, what happened here? I lost my place. Oh, here we are. But if that nation against which I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent concerning the calamity I planned. There is the planning. Everybody look. Can everybody see that? And I'm not just talking to you, by the way, who asked me the question. I'm talking to everybody. All my Calvinist friends, let me get my mouse on the right screen. I planned. Even if you want to say, well, he's not talking about the same thing as Romans 9, well, fine, put that aside. Jeremiah 18 itself would disprove your theology. Look at it. I will relent concerning the calamity I planned. God's saying what I planned, I will change. Now, you cannot get a Calvinist system to harmonize that. You just absolutely cannot. Or at another moment, I might speak concerning a nation or concerning a kingdom to build up or to plant it. But if it does evil in my sight, not listening to my voice, then I will relent concerning the good which I promise to do good to it. You have to know. So he decides how to use the clay. And in Romans 9, how he uses the clay depends. We know that from other texts. Now, I couldn't establish it just from that section in Romans 9. Now, actually, I believe I could establish it from the rest of Romans 9. But if we're just looking at, and I didn't get much further past the vessel passage, but if we're just looking at that, I couldn't prove maybe God does unconditionally choose who will be a believer and who will not. Turns out he doesn't. But look at this. Chapter 9. After everything he said, he says, what shall we say then? In conclusion to everything Paul has been saying about Jacob and Esau, vessels of honor, Pharaoh, the potter and clay, the objections that he mentioned. What shall we say? What's the conclusion, Paul? That Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness lay hold of righteousness, even the righteousness which is by faith. But Israel, pursuing a law of righteousness, did not attain that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but as though it were by works. But it doesn't say that God decides if they would believe in the first place. He has a purpose plan, just as it says in Jeremiah 18, with believers and one plan with unbelievers. And just as he can take one purpose for you and shift it and change it, because you can become an unbeliever, you can become a believer. But, okay. Maybe 1K we can do about in the ring. Perhaps. Cosmic Septic. Great job. Thanks. I appreciate that. Let's see. He reacts to the clay. You know, he does react. Yeah, God reacts to people. I mean, saving people is a reaction, but he does it as he so chooses. All right. Well, so that's it. I appreciate you guys. Let's see. That's not what I wanted to do. Should be. Anyway, I appreciate you guys. I'm going to get out of here. I appreciate you being a part of it. Remember, share the word about the podcast. Thank you for being a part of this. Remember us being live. Hit subscribe. Hit the notifications. God bless and good night.